Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We are going to wait a couple minutes to give everyone some time to log in, and then we'll get started. All right, and I will introduce today's moderator, Laurent Huber from Action on Smoking and Health.
Welcome to this webinar today, where you will hear from tobacco control heroes who have been pioneers in the smoke-free movement. And we're holding this event today in what basically coincides with the 50th anniversary of the introduction of smoke-free sections on airplanes. While definitely not enough to adequately protect the health of those who worked on airplanes or the passengers, it was still a first step towards the concept that was considered really radical 50 years ago to protect all of us from exposure to tobacco smoke. This webinar today is co-hosted by Arizonans Concerned About Smoking and ASH, Action on Smoking and Health. So you will hear today from those who were the founders of the smoke-free movement and who are to fight extremely hard every step of the way to protect our right to breathe free air today in airplanes and also in other public places. For those of you who are unfamiliar with ASH, it's the oldest tobacco control organization in the United States, formed in 1967. And until 2000, its main focus was non-smokers' rights. But in 2000, we shifted towards a more comprehensive global approach, and with the idea of protecting both non-smokers as well as smokers from the harms caused by tobacco. And we did this by taking an international and a global approach. And we were instrumental in supporting the development of the first UN treaty on health, and which addressed specifically tobacco. That's the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And we've continued over the past 20 years to address tobacco as a priority within the UN system. And now we really focus on supporting and developing and pushing for novel policies to help lower the smoking prevalence in the United States and across the world. We're particularly interested in addressing the supply side of tobacco products, retail environments, and support policies that will phase out the sale of commercial tobacco products, while also taking into account the needs of smokers. Before I introduce the panelists for today, a quick housekeeping issue. There will be ample time for Q&A. So you could already start during when you hear the panelists to type your question. You can find by using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and you can direct him to a specific speaker. So it's a pleasure now for me to introduce the first speaker. It's Philip Carpenter, who's the Executive Director of Arizonans Concerned About Smoking, ACAS, who will say a few words of introduction. Mr. Carpenter, please go ahead.
Thank you, Laurent. It is indeed an honor to welcome all of you here today virtually. My name is Philip Carpenter, and I serve as the Executive Director of Arizonans Concerned About Smoking, Incorporated. As I mentioned with my invite to all of you, I learned of this most significant achievement a few months ago when Betty's granddaughter contacted us and asked if we were planning anything for the 50th anniversary of this remarkable advancement in tobacco control that has now happened worldwide. Looking back in time, I'm extremely proud that our ACAS founder, Betty Carnes, knew this was wrong, that she had the opportunity to be a difference maker, and decided to do something about it. Betty and her husband flew a lot back then, and she must have surely been troubled by being in an enclosed workplace, in this case, an aircraft cabin, and everyone being subjected to toxic secondhand smoke. She was obviously motivated to seek and assure herself and other passengers, along with flight attendants on that long scheduled flight from New York to Phoenix, that they deserve something better than smoky, recirculated air. Back then, you had no choice, and for the longest time, there were no designated non-smoking rows on airlines until August 8th, 1971. In my closing, following the death of ACAS dedicated founder and president Betty Carnes at age 82 in Scottsdale, Arizona in 1987, John F. Bansaff III, founder of Action on Smoking and Health, ASH, came all the way from Washington, D.C. to Scottsdale, Arizona to deliver his personal memorial tribute at her funeral service. Betty was instrumental in fundraising for ASH. A very special thank you to ASH today, and especially Megan Arendt and Nichelle Gray for making this 50th anniversary webinar a reality. Laurent, back to you.
Thank you. And now I want to introduce Dr. Fairbanks, who's been instrumental also in getting hospitals smoke-free, and who's the president. So Dr. Fairbanks is the president of Arizona's Concern About Smoking, and he will share a statement about the very important role that Betty Carnes played, and as founder of ACAS in the advocacy fight for smoke-free airlines. Dr. Fairbanks, please go ahead.
Well, thank you. Do you hear me all right?
Loud and clear.
I'm just grateful. I get treated with such respect by people growing up in poverty. You don't have to be rich to be rich in other things. And I was rich with the kind of associates that I linked up with and people who appreciated the work of Betty Carnes and all of us working together. And so as a family physician starting in 1958 in Arizona with the Indian Health Service at Colorado River Reservation, Parker, Arizona, and just moving on from there, I am grateful to be able to make some comments, and we appreciated the work with joining with ASH and working together. We got legal advice from the founder of ASH, who was professor of law and could answer the questions when they said, I've got a right to smoke. He said, there's no basis for that. And so I thank all of you now, and I think back then, went up from poverty in the Great Depression, I could develop riches in other ways, not financial. And so at this time, I am speaking and reaffirming what Philip Carpenter said about the work of Betty Carnes. She was a go-getter, get it done, nothing's going to stop us type person, and we need more of those. And then in 1964, when the first Surgeon General's report came out, Dr. Luther Terry told me, and at his death in 1985, his widow said, for memorials, there's two memorials that stand out. ASH, got airlines for moving forward, and got the advertising for tobacco off radio and television. And the other organization that stood up with him was American Lung Association. And Betty Carnes then joined working closely with ASH, and she was a faithful co-worker with ASH until her time came to move on. And I've been fortunate to be the president of Arizona's Concern About Smoking since 1987, getting more credit than deserved. Always where I go, whether it's here or in Africa with the Peace Corps, or wherever, we're all brothers and sisters, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak today as the old country doctor. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Fairbanks. Now we'll introduce also someone who was absolutely instrumental in this fight to get us smoke-free airplanes, something that now would seem totally crazy to us to have to be sitting in smoke-filled trip on an airplane. So I'm introducing you to Patricia Young, who's with the Flight Attendant Medical Research Institute and was really at the epicenter of this fight, and can kind of give us a very, very interesting view of how it took to fight this very, very difficult battle. Patty, please go ahead.
Thank you. I started flying as a stewardess in the summer of 1966, about 4 days into my 20th birthday. And the first thing the other stewardesses said to me were, Patty, you're going to meet really interesting, handsome men. You're going to go to beautiful places. Patty, I have the lungs of a smoker and I never smoked. That's what my doctor told me. And we had to have physicals back then to keep our jobs. And that's how this showed up. You know, scientifically, we could prove some of us had the lungs of smokers. So when some of them said that to me, I was utterly stunned that this wasn't paid attention to. I couldn't believe it. It haunted me. And so I started asking, we had to take every flight we flew, even if it was a 20-minute flight, you had to take all the names and all the destinations of all the passengers. And when I would come across a doctor, I would go back during the flight and ask any of the doctors, what does it mean if you have the lungs of smokers? Is it different? I mean, the non-smoker having the lungs of a smoker and the smoker having lungs of smokers. Every single doctor said, I don't know, but don't worry about it. I don't think it means anything. And I knew it did because when I first started flying, I got so sick from the smoke on the airplane all the time. You could hardly see from first class to coach that I literally would vomit on my flights all the time and have diarrhea and violent headaches. So I knew it meant something. So I started going back to the passengers, trying to garner information. And I must have spent thousands of hours talking to passengers quietly on the airplane, on the jump seat, in the buffet, in their seats, telling them what we were going through, that some of our stewardesses were dying at the ages of 27 years old, 30 years old, because they got lung cancer and they'd never smoked. So it was a real tragedy. So I also started calling Congress, talking to anybody that would talk to me. I called the FAA to tell them what was going on. And I think I met John Banzaf in about 1978, I believe, about maybe late 1978. And he was the first person I talked to who was really involved in the non-smoking movement. And he was very helpful. So there's so much to say. I mean, like sometimes can't even remember what to say next. I'm having a, I ended up speaking in Congress 3 times. And the last time I spoke, all of the few flight attendants who were there from like 7 in the morning till 7 o'clock at night or later, we got sabotaged by the people in Congress. We were in one of those big Watergate built rooms with all the people sitting in front of us in a semicircular way. And they started smoking, some of them, and we just got shut down. So we didn't get to speak till late at night. So nobody was there, nobody heard us. So John, it was appalling. John Banzaf called the few of us and said, like within a day or two, can you get back up to Washington, D.C.? I'm going to give you a press conference so you can give your speech. So I gave away my trips, flew back up to D.C. and got there. And it was at George Washington Law School in that one of the big conference areas. And there were many, many, many reporters there. So we all gave our speeches. And at the end of the speeches, a man came up to me from Miami and he said, listen, I'm going to tell you something. If you ever come across a flight attendant who is really, really sick, who hasn't lived around secondhand smoke, call these lawyers in Miami, Susan and Stanley Rosenblatt. I bet you money they would take her or his case. So maybe 2 years later, a lady by the name of Norma Broing called me. She had lung cancer. She was based in San Diego. She said everybody told her to call me, and she told me the lawyers that she had visited with to try to take her case, and nobody would. I'd already been to those lawyers, so they were known, and they just said it was just impossible, including Public Citizen. And so Norma flew to Miami to meet with them. And they took the lawsuit on as a class action lawsuit, which was much better. So it included thousands of people. So in the lawsuit, we ended up getting the Flight Attendant Medical Research Institute in a agreement out of court. It was a $300 million research institute that does, I'll tell you exactly, it's an independent not-for-profit foundation sponsoring medical and scientific research to combat the diseases caused by exposure to secondhand smoke. And it's been an immense help globally to get medicine and science involved in this issue. I mean, I could ask all of you, how many of you have been asked about your secondhand smoke tobacco exposure? I bet not many of you. And it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. So we're working on that too. I mean, it's over 50,000 people in the United States alone are murdered by secondhand smoke, and doctors aren't asking anything about it. On my board, there are always 7 board members, and 4 of them are flight attendants. 2 of our trustees flew. They both died of throat cancer and breast cancer, and the other one died of COPD. And neither one of them, they had lengthy illnesses. Neither one of them were ever asked about their secondhand tobacco smoke exposure. Absolutely outrageous. So you'll know there was the fight really is 55 years long as of July. I get so nervous doing this, I'm sorry. But we've got to do something to get medicine involved in this, not just treating the people who are sick, getting involved, asking questions like a detective. Why does this person have throat cancer? Flight attendants have the highest breast cancer rate of any working group in the United States. So, and I think this needs to be looked at as a world war by big business tobacco against humanity. It's an absolute war. How do you kill 8 million people a year and the whole world still cheers it on? Bravo. You know, it's nothing. So you kill 8 million people a year. My mother and dad both died of lung cancer. So there's so much, I'm sorry, there's so much more to this. But I want to tell you what I'm saying. These are my own opinions, because I'm really a whistleblower and a street fighter. I cursed my way through this whole fight, just with utter, horrible harassment from the airline towards me. Horrible harassment all the time. But I said I would have to be dead to stop the fight. So, and actually, when I started the fight, I never, ever questioned it not working. I never had one doubt, even with all the hell that went on. I never, ever had one doubt that this would not work.
So you had full confidence that you were going to end up winning this battle.
Absolutely. No matter what. When I would come home and cry, no matter what, I just knew it was going to work.
And it took legal action for this to be able to make a right of this very, very terrible injustice.
Yes, Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights, ASH, and all the other people that got together little by little by little.
And obviously, you're also by leading and mobilizing around the flight attendants. We'll have opportunity for questions. I think a lot of people will be very interested in hearing more details about your involvement and the details of this battle. In order to make sure that we have ample time, I will introduce the next speaker. Dr. Alfred Monzer, who's the chair of Action on Smoking, of the Board of Action on Smoking and Health, former president of the American Lung Association, and he also was very involved in this fight, testified in Congress on this matter, and is going to also give us this historical perspective. Dr. Monzer, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Laurent. And it's really a pleasure for me to be with all of you today. I am especially pleased, of course, to be with Patty Young, Dr. Fairbanks, and of course, Phil Carpenter, but Patty Young and Dr. Fairbanks, especially since the two of you were really present at the creation of the non-smokers' rights movement. And of course, it's also terrific to hear the name of Betty Carnes. Betty Carnes, of course, who was instrumental really in funding Action on Smoking and Health, and who continues through her estate to support the organization, for which we are all very grateful. I'm a pulmonary physician, a pulmonary specialist, and I began my practice in 1974 and quickly realized that 80% of the patients I treated had diseases that were directly attributable to smoking. So I immediately got involved with the American Lung Association, and shortly thereafter, I was recruited by John Banzaf to get involved with ASH. And that's how I really became aware of the tremendous struggle that John and ASH had carried on with the Federal Aviation Administration to at least create non-smoking sections on airlines. The FAA really was totally unresponsive, although in 1973, they did establish a ban on smoking in lavatories after a fire caused by smoking in a lavatory caused a crash and tragically the death of 124 people. At that point, the advocates turned to the Civil Aeronautics Board, and which finally, in 1972, after the example from 1971 that we're celebrating today, the CAB finally established non-smoking sections on all domestic airlines. Of course, as you just heard, as Patty just mentioned, this presented a huge, hopeless enforcement problem for the staff on airplanes. The CAB was dismantled in 1984. And then from 1983 to 1984, there were all sorts of congressional hearings on the potential harmful effects of secondhand smoke, but really to no effect. And then in 1986, the Surgeon General's report on the dangers of secondhand smoke really changed the atmosphere. At that point, the first airline to go entirely smoke-free was Air Canada, including flights, of course, coming to the United States. Well, in 1987, there were hearings held, as you heard, to ban smoking on flights of 2 hours or less. Congressmen were afraid that people could not abstain from smoking on flights longer than 2 hours. I attended that hearing, like many, many others, and like Patty, and she's absolutely right. I got to speak at that hearing after midnight, and the only person remaining on the dais at the time was the late Congressman John Lewis, of course, a tremendous civil rights hero who passed away last year. And it was a result of those hearings that finally in 1987, smoking was banned on flights of 2 hours or less. And then in 1990, of course, this was extended to a ban to all domestic flights. And that, of course, began a battle to extend this to the international community. And that was from 1992 to 1996, when the American Lung Association and other organizations then forming the Coalition on Smoking and Health, and of course, Action on Smoking and Health, approached the International Civil Aviation Organization, which is based in Montreal, to ban smoking on all airline flights. And that took a very, very long time, as I said, until 1996, because that organization works entirely by consensus. There had to be unanimity of all of the participating airlines to achieve this goal. And this past July, just last month, we celebrated actually the 25th anniversary, finally, of that particular event when smoking was banned on all international flights. So, what are the lessons that we learn from this very, very long process? I think the most important lessons are really that the community, the health community, has to speak with one single voice, and that we have to be satisfied, unfortunately, at times with incremental success. This took much too long, but nonetheless, if it hadn't been a sustained effort over many, many years, we would never have gotten here. So again, it's been a pleasure really to be with you today, and I look forward to hearing from Laurent, and then certainly answering any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Monzer, for this wonderful summary and of how the whole process evolved. It was very, very, very useful. Next, we're going to listen to a statement from Senator Durbin, who's not able to attend. This is Senator Durbin from Illinois, who's been a strong supporter of smoke-free air. He was not able to attend the event, but he sent a statement for the event. Michelle, please go ahead and we cannot hear the sound right now. Still no sound. Still no sound.
Please remember to press the share sound button and share screen.
Thanks for inviting me to celebrate this special day with you. 50 years ago, thanks to the efforts of a lot of people in this room, American Airlines piloted one of the first smoke-free sections on an airplane. It was only 3 rows, but what is important, it wasn't enough, and we had to move forward. I got stuck in the middle seat of a smoking section on a flight from Phoenix to Chicago decades ago. I was surrounded by smokers, and I looked around the plane 2 rows in front of me in the so-called smoke-free section. There was a mother with an infant, and I thought, this makes no sense. We knew secondhand smoke was dangerous, especially for little kids and elderly people and people who were sick. So I went back to the House of Representatives in Washington, introduced an amendment to ban smoking on flights of 2 hours or less. To the surprise of big tobacco, much of the airline industry, and even my staff, my amendment passed and it was signed into law. I didn't know it. It was a tipping point. We finally decided if smoking wasn't safe on airplanes, it really wasn't safe anywhere else either. States, cities, restaurants, hospitals, public transportation, everybody started enacting measures to ban smoking. The tobacco industry didn't give up. They were fighting all the way, and they developed new products to try to addict our children on nicotine. Now they have one called e-cigarettes or vaping. For years, Big Tobacco has marketed these kid-friendly nicotine flavors in a concerted, targeted effort aimed at kids. Fortunately, after years of unnecessary delay, we finally have an opportunity to get this right. It's past time for the Food and Drug Administration to take action to protect our kids against these deadly products. I'm committed to working to make this a reality. I hope you'll join me.
So we thank Senator Durbin for his statement. And so, as you've heard from the various speakers, there's, I think, quite a lot of lessons that can be drawn from the fight to have all flights smoke-free. As you heard today, smoke-free environments was really considered a very radical thing 55 years ago. And as Dr. Monzer said, it took a tremendous amount of work to get there, and quite a few steps. And even within the tobacco control community and the public health movement, this was considered fairly radical not that long ago, even just about 20 years ago, 21 years ago. I remember between 2000 and 2003, when we tried to introduce the concept of smoke-free in the treaty negotiations for the World Treaty on Tobacco, there was some opposition almost, and even reluctance even from our own movement. Even within the public health community, there were people who thought this is too radical. A smoke-free restaurant and bar, we'll never get there. That's impossible. That cannot happen. And not only did we manage to get smoke-free as a key element in this tobacco treaty that was adopted in 2003, the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control has a strong article now, which has made it very clear that there's no safe level of exposure to tobacco smoke, and all places should be smoke-free. But really, everyone thought, even after we managed to do that, people thought it was going to be extremely difficult to implement at a country level. The only examples we had was really in California, where we had some smoke-free policies, but the rest of the world did not have that. I remember we at ASH, we went with a WHO team, a team from the Pan American Health Organization, to countries in Latin America and the Caribbean to try to build the capacity of NGOs to engage in advocacy for smoke-free policies. I remember, for example, in Uruguay in 2003, we did one of those capacity trainings, and everyone thought it's impossible. The medical community smokes, everyone smokes, it's going to be impossible. We'll never be able to get our country smoke-free. But you know what? 3 years later, in 2006, Uruguay became the first smoke-free country in the Americas, where basically you could not smoke in any public place, with a tremendous amount of public support. And really, it's worth saying, I think, that by 2004, so many years after the hard work by the people in this panel, smoke-free really become a topic of the day within the public health community that almost everyone rallied behind. And while it's true that within the United States, there's some communities in the United States where not everyone is still protected from exposure to tobacco smoke, but a lot of us are. And we need to remember that tobacco is still the leading cause of preventable death and disease worldwide today. As Patty said, killing more than 8 million people every year, mostly because of cigarettes. The Lancet report, just a report from a few months ago, suggested that there's more smokers today than in 1990. And even though the prevalence is going down just because the world population has gone up, we have more smokers in the world today. So as a community, we need to do more, and we need to continue this fight. So we managed to get the airplane smoke-free, but we need to do more and consider phasing out the commercial sale of tobacco products and these very dangerous products like cigarettes. And I know that this seems almost impossible today, but the fight in the smoke-free with smoke-free airplane and smoke-free flights, it's a reminder that what seemed totally impossible can be achieved. And thanks to people like Patty, who believed it is doable. Yes, we can make it happen. Same with Dr. Fairbanks, Betty Carnes, Dr. Monzer, Philip Carpenter, people like that who really believe it could happen. What seems impossible today can happen. And we've seen, for example, now in the context of phasing out the sale of commercial tobacco products, Beverly Hills and Manhattan Beach have managed to phase out the sale of tobacco products, the commercial sale of tobacco products. And the town of Brookline in Massachusetts has banned the sale of tobacco to anyone born after January 1st, 2000. And those are small accomplishments and are just the first steps, but they have the potential to be instrumental in achieving a world free of tobacco-related death and disease in the next 50 years. So I think we should have a certain level of optimism and learn from those fighters. And I know, for example, Patty, how much you had to suffer and breathe in that secondhand smoke. But thanks to people like you, look what has been accomplished. And thanks to the tobacco control community, we really might be able to get in the next 50 years a tobacco-free future. So we have ample time for questions for Q&A. And so that will give quite an opportunity also for the speakers to speak a little bit more about some of their experiences and so on and so forth. But I'll go to one of the first questions. from Rabbi Plotkin, who said, I used to end up on the flight attendant's oxygen tank. With the spreading of the use of marijuana, vaping, e-cigarettes, are they all covered by the tobacco ban in airlines and airports, or do we need expanded coverage from laws? So my understanding is that in the flights, yes, and I fly a lot for work when we're not in COVID times. And indeed, I hear all the time that even vaping is not allowed, that people have to restrain from using those products. Airports, I understand, is different. Those are governed by different jurisdictions, and every airport and every country can be different. I understand that in Colorado, there are smoking sections, for example, that I believe still allow for smoking and even cannabis smoking now. So it is true that maybe that needs to be addressed in different jurisdictions. So I'd like to, do any of the panelists want to comment on this? Dr. Monzer, for example, or Patty, would you like to address that issue? You're muted. Did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, could you restate the question a little bit? I had a little bit of trouble hearing here.
So that whether the flight law, the ban on airlines, does it cover also a ban on smoking other products like cannabis, for example, or vaping, or using e-cigarettes or some of those
Thank
other?
you. Sure. Thank you. Well, in actual fact, I think probably the battle continues on airlines and elsewhere. And, we're becoming increasingly aware of the dangers of vaping. And so that certainly needs to be addressed, as will other products. I think nobody should be involuntarily be inhaling any product that another person chooses to inhale. Our lungs are very, very delicate organs, very fine, so delicate that they allow the free passage of oxygen and carbon dioxide. And yet, we expose that very delicate surface to all sorts of dangers. And we continuously have to minimize those dangers. So that is really, that's true for infectious agents, and it's also true for other toxic or potentially toxic agents.
Thank you. Patty, I have a question for you. What was the role of the tobacco industry on all of this? Can you tell us a little bit about what role did they play in trying to block the passage of smoke-free airplanes?
Well, they were always there, always paying people off to be their representatives, people in the House and Senate, even all the American Lung Cancer and Heart Societies took tobacco money for a while. I know in our flight attendant lawsuit against tobacco, Stanley Rosenblatt and Susan Rosenblatt made one of the parts of the lawsuit that within 2 years, our lawsuit was over in the summer of '97. And within 2 years of that, the tobacco companies agreed to the fact that they would not push anything so all airlines could go smoke-free around the world coming into this country. So they wouldn't break that. They wouldn't go influencing somebody to let smoking stay on coming into the country. So I know when you're part of a lawsuit, you're on another level of things that the enemy can do. Like the tobacco company sent people to sit outside my house for like 3 days, just sitting in a car watching me. They're allowed to do that apparently. I just wanted to moon them, but I thought, no, that would just really not be good. But I watched them and just waved to them, they sat across the street just smiling at me. And I know somebody came into my house, it had to be the tobacco people twice. I can't prove it, but they left a message on my answering machine from the inside. It's where you can tell the difference from somebody calling on a phone, leaving a message, and somebody leaving a memo in their own home. And I flew turnaround. So I got home at night and found a memo from a guy talking to somebody else in the house. I can't prove it, One time outside in the back, somebody ripped a piece of a fence off of my cedar fence about this big. And you could see it made a window, and then somebody had been standing there. It could be anybody doing it, but they were smoking with a huge pile of cigarettes on the ground, you know, whoever it was. But it was, there was a lot of harassment. And I was going to tell you also that fire on American Airlines going into Paris, my boyfriend, David Hume Kennerly, a Pulitzer Prize photojournalist, photographed that fire. And he heard it was coming in, so he got out on the runway and he photographed the American Airlines jet coming in with the guys in the cockpit hanging out the window. And like the doctor said, 124 people were burned to death because smokers have their rights. I had 5 fires on my flights from smokers, 2 in one night, 1 in a seat, 1 in the bathroom. Thank God they were found. I could just go on and on and on. I mean, I've even got burns on my arms, walking through the aisles, trying to get through with people holding their cigarettes out in the aisle and sticking their cigarette in my skin. You know, that happened to everybody.
And how did the industry, the tobacco industry, use front groups to try to block that movement to get airplanes to be smoke-free?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Did the tobacco industry try to use front groups? So groups that could appear to be legitimate stakeholders to try to get them to oppose airplanes from becoming smoke-free? And maybe Patty or Dr. Monzer may.
Oh, I'm sure they did. I mean, right now, when you think about it, again, how is the medical community globally not even asking the most basic questions about secondhand smoke exposure? There are studies out that show the grandparents smoked, their children did not smoke, but their grandchildren can be altered. Their cells can be altered because of the secondhand smoke that went through the body. You know, where's medicine on this? Where are their voices? We have faces, we have value as non-smokers, and we're being dismissed.
I can read some interesting comments made on the Q&A section where Joel Dunnington posts, Patty, don't forget that the AMA took tobacco money to do tobacco research and stayed quiet for many, many years. There was a statement from Amos Hausner, an attorney and lawyer from Israel, and who works between Israel and New York City. And it was, please note that the U.S. Supreme Court opinion of 2004, when an airline passenger who suffered from acute asthma was sitting in the plane in the non-smoking section, but only 3 lines ahead of the smoking section. His request to move further was denied. He had an attack, could not breathe, and passed away 3 hours after the flight had begun. Olympic Airways was found liable to his death. This is the Hussein versus Olympic Airways opinion by Just Thomas. He says this manifests that the existence of smoking sections can cost life. So definitely, this is definitely the case.
He was murdered. I mean, he was murdered just like all the non-smokers who are being murdered. I know so many flight attendants who have died from the smoke on the airplane. It's appalling.
Dr. Monzer, in the context of the in Congress, how did things play out? Where was most of the where was the support coming from, and where was the opposition from? Are you muted? You're muted, Dr. Monzer.
Anymore. Okay. Actually, you know, the opposition within Congress was enormous. You know, and it's not just in the U.S. Congress, but really throughout the United States. I remember testifying before a committee of the Maryland legislature on the dangers of secondhand smoke. And all of these members around the table, or many of them, took out their cigarettes and started smoking simply to insult me, to put me down. And that really, you know, was really the attitude that prevailed for a very long time. I think that things have changed, but the influence of the tobacco industry, of tobacco money, still continues in the US Congress. And it's still very, very difficult, to get meaningful legislation passed on a national level. And so, as I said before, we really have to be satisfied, just stick with the message over and over again, shame these people, expose these people who take tobacco money. The vast majority of Americans have now accepted the idea that smoking is dangerous. And it's high time, that Congress really as a whole bought into that truth.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Can I say something about that, please?
Go ahead, Patty.
I want people to know that the only people who helped us get smoking off the airplane were the Democrats. The Republicans sabotaged us at every single turn. And just the few Democrats that I can name right here are Henry Waxman and Edward Kennedy, Frank Lautenberg, Dick Durbin. I love you, Dick Durbin. James Oberstar, John Lewis, Martin Frost. Orrin Hatch was the only Republican that helped us get smoking off the airplane.
It's a shame that it got politicized. We're fortunate now that we have some Republicans who are supporting strong tobacco control policies. For example, on our board, we do have a Republican mayor from Beverly Hills who has been very, very active in promoting the phasing out of commercial sale of tobacco products. So this should not be a political issue because it involves really everyone. Also, I think it's worth pointing out, one of our colleagues from South Africa points out that Peter Uko, that in South Africa, South African Airways introduced smoke-free flights only in April of 1998. So in some countries, it was a lot longer for people to be able to protect it from tobacco smoke in airplanes. They're trying to go back to the questions that we have here. There's one question that someone was asking about tobacco products. Disappeared here. Where did that question go? There was a question was related to the comment I made about the phasing out of the sale of commercial tobacco products, and the person asked, for some reason I cannot see the question anymore, asked, are there any other non-commercial ones? So yes, there is obviously the religious and spiritual use, for example, like Native American traditional use of tobacco products, which is very different from what the tobacco industry does. And I believe Dr. Fairbanks addressed that issue, has addressed that issue before. Dr. Fairbanks, can you make a little bit that distinction between what's traditional tobacco use that Native Americans would do versus that commercialization by an industry that ends up killing 8 million people a year?
Yes, thank you. The Native Americans had a central pot of smoking tobacco products taken from the mountains, not enhanced by the tobacco industry to add nicotine to the basic plant out on the mountains. And they didn't smoke the cigarettes or the cigars. They just had the ceremonies with the smoke coming up from a central pot, I guess you'd call it. And the smoke took prayers heavenward. That was the way it was. But as a physician in the Indian Health Service, when the American Indians that didn't smoke commercial tobacco went into the military service, and there they didn't get rest breaks. They were given smoking breaks. And some of the leaders in the military thought that tobacco was more precious than food. So the food rations contained tobacco to everyone when it came time to eat. And so many of these Native Americans came back from the military as addicted smokers. And then we physicians in the Indian Health hospitals first started seeing lung disease and heart disease that hadn't shown up before when they did not go into the military. And I got part of my training in the Veterans Administration Hospital in Minneapolis, which was like a smoke-filled dungeon. And they didn't get much help in getting rid of their other addictions as long as they smoked. And their research showed that if you're going to get rid of other addictions, you better get the nicotine out of your system. So that's the turning point. I think in getting rid of addictions, get rid of the pervasive addiction in the central nervous system synapses, nicotine. Do that first, and then you've got much better chance to get rid of your other addictions. So it's a widespread problem. And the military, at first, thought there was a right to smoke, and they couldn't stop the smokers. But now, even the veterans hospitals are starting to have non-smoking rooms. Thank you.
Thank you. And clearly there's a big distinction between traditional ritualistic use, which doesn't really lead to an epidemic, and the commercialization by a big industry. Patty, I see you have your hand raised. Do you have a comment?
Well, this is really important. Within about 15, 20 minutes on the airplane with smoking, we had so much smoke in the air that the inside of our white blouses turned brown. Edges on the sleeves, they turned brown, rubbing up and down our arm. So one night with a crew, we were flying into, I remember it was El Paso, got there about midnight, and I asked the crew if they would help me do something. So we went into the hangar, and there was a big 727 there with that huge ramp going up to it, the staircase going up to it, where it showed the outflow valve streaking down the airplane when it was taking the air out of bleeding the air out of the cabin, and it stained the whole end of the airplane. And so I asked the crew if they would help me go up the stairs and scrape some of that debris off, because I took with me a one-sided razor blade, a clean jar, and three of us, myself and the captain and the first officer, went up the huge staircase, and we scraped it off and put it in the jar. And this mechanic came out, and he said, looked up midnight, and he said, "What are you doing up on that staircase?" Because we just got out of our airplane getting ready to go on our layover, and we just decided to do this. I decided to do it. And I said, "Well, it looks like I'm cleaning your airplane." And he said, "I want to tell you something, lady. That brown black debris is solid nicotine waste." And he said, "One bit of that rolled up the size of a green pea can kill a 7-pound cat. That's how toxic it is." So I sent the jar to John Banzaf, told him about it. He called a press conference, and it made world news. It was a really big deal press conference.
Yeah, I understand that one of the reasons also was that so much tar would accumulate that basically the mask, in case of cabin depressurization, would not come down because it would get stuck by the tar from the cigarettes. There's one question that I'd like to pose to Mr. Philip Carpenter, and it's do you know whether private jets need to abide by the non-smoking rule, or are they exempt? Do you know?
You know, I'm not sure. That's an excellent question. I think that's coming from Karen Blumenfeld, perhaps. But
Yes.
Maybe that's something we could ask Civil Aeronautic Medical Institute, based out of Oklahoma City, and we'll try to get back to everyone about that. That's an excellent question, because sometimes you'll see these mini series where people are flying in these private airplanes and all kinds of stuff happens. But that's an excellent question. I really don't know.
And I just there was a last question, obviously related to Native Americans, and do they want to use flavors such as cotton candy, mango, or menthol mint? And I really doubt that traditional ritual use of cigarettes, not cigarettes, of tobacco by Native Americans would use such flavors. I remember I spent some time in Montana, living in Montana, and worked with the Native American communities. And I remember a lot of them actually were very involved in cessation and not encouraging people to smoke at all, even though they use traditionally tobacco products for traditional purposes. They were very, very strong in really advocating for non-use and helping people quit. I'm going to give the floor to the panelists just for if you can make just 1 minute statement, final statement, and we will close the session. So let's go by the order we started. Philip, Mr. Carpenter, do you want to just last few words?
Absolutely, I appreciate it. One of the highlights of my life and my experience in tobacco control was several summers ago being able to attend John Vansaff's Non-Smokers' Rights Conference at George Washington University back in Washington, D.C. And the keynote speaker, as you might expect, was Patty Young. I have relayed some of what she talked about and what some of her experiences were back then. And people's eyes just open up. They just can't believe that something like this happened. And so Patty, to me, has been one of the most highly inspirational tobacco control advocates that I've had the honor of hearing. And I'm just delighted that she could join today. I just can't say enough. And thank you so much to Ash for making this happen. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Dr. Fairbanks, please, last word. You're muted. You're muted right now.
I'm muted. I believe the golden rule is the guidance for life. Treat people with mutual respect, even if you disagree with them. You disagree with mutual respect, and we're all sisters and brothers around the world, and let's live the golden rule. Thank you. And I think you're showing that today with the kind of things you're talking about.
Thank you, Dr. Fairbanks. Patty, please.
Well, this has been a war against humanity, like I've said before. And we're not looking at it like that by big business tobacco and other big businesses doing the same thing. This is an environmental issue, a civil rights issue, a human rights issue, a disability rights issue. And for people who are out there trying to save the forests, the waters, the oceans, the mountains, the trees, humanity, if they smoke, they are a total contradiction to what it is they're trying to do. You have to start looking at smoking as a total environmental catastrophe, a human rights catastrophe, and on and on. Nothing else kills over 8 million people a year and makes trillions of dollars doing it, regarding every expense that is ever spent, like my mom and dad, when they died, every tank of gas to go take them to the hospital or the doctor, or losing their spouse and how the other person withers away and dies. I mean, it affects everybody in the family and everybody they know. Every expense that's spent on somebody treating tobacco diseases, it's got to be looked at as an issue of war and peace by big business tobacco.
Indeed, it is a crime against humanity. Dr. Monzer, and someone
the campaign against smoking is really probably the most important public health campaign ever waged. And we still have a ways to go. But, there's only a hairbreadth difference between tobacco, the addiction to tobacco, and addiction to products that are clearly illegal, like heroin. And it's time that we began to treat those two alike and to eliminate, to really ban the commercial sale of tobacco products. It may be a goal that's still a ways off, but it's very important that that's the goal we concentrate on at the present time.
Indeed, it's not a legitimate product for mass consumption, and given that the amount of death toll it causes on humanity. So thank you so much for joining us today. And please stay tuned. We will have more webinars coming up. And there will be videos done of these and interviews for the people involved in this fight over the 50 years. So please, you can visit our website where you find some more information. So thank you very much to all of you for attending today. And stay tuned and keep up this fight for health and for humanity. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.
And